I never thought I'd be sitting here telling you this, but my entire life changed in the space of a single, deafening morning. Can you even imagine the sound of a front door being kicked in before dawn, followed by the terrifying, frantic shouts of police officers? That was my 17th birthday. Not the sweet 16 moment you dream of, was it? In that moment, watching my father, my hero, the pillar of our seemingly perfect upper-middle class world being slammed against the hallway wall in handcuffs, I knew one thing for certain. Everything I believed about my family was a lie, a beautifully constructed, fragile facade. He was being arrested for wire fraud, money laundering, and embezzlement on a scale that would make the evening news for weeks. He was marched out, head bowed, not meeting my eyes, and my mother just stood there, clutching her silk robe, her face a mask of calculated panic, not sorrow. Was I wrong for the initial, gut-wrenching feeling that wasn't sympathy, but a bizarre mix of terror and vindication? Tell me honestly if you would have felt the same chilling clarity in that moment, that the implosion of our family was long overdue, and maybe, just maybe, it was necessary. To understand why I reacted that way, you have to know what life was like before the sirens. We lived in a house that looked like it was pulled straight from a luxury magazine. My dad, Mark, was a successful financial consultant, always impeccably dressed, always traveling, always on his phone. He had that smooth, effortless charm that made everyone, from the waiters at our favorite Italian place to his business partners, instantly trust him. He was the kind of man who'd buy my mom a new designer handbag every other week, just because. My mother, Eleanor, was a quintessential trophy wife, a stunning, poised woman who ran a charity that seemed more focused on fundraising galas than actual charitable work. Everything revolved around appearances. My grades had to be perfect. My clothes had to be branded. Our family vacations had to be to places that generated the best Instagram photos. But underneath the veneer of perfection, there was a coldness, a silence that permeated the air. Dad was rarely home, and when he was either on a call or critiquing something about me or my mom. Never harsh, always delivered with a smile, but devastating nonetheless. Is that really what you're wearing, sweetie? You might want to rethink that college application essay. It lacks punch. Mom was completely obsessed with maintaining her social standing. She used me as a prop, a bright, well-behaved daughter to show off at her functions. Our home life was not a place of warmth, but a stage for a perpetual performance. The first crack in the foundation, the one I look back on now and see as the giant, neon-flashing sign I ignored, happened about a year before the arrest. I overheard my dad arguing late one night in his study, and the door was slightly ajar. His voice was low, strained, and completely unlike his usual jovial tone. I only caught a few phrases. The books won't balance. They're asking too many questions. And then, chillingly, we'll lose everything if she finds out. I tiptoed away, my heart pounding, telling myself it was just work stress. But the seed of doubt was planted. Over the next few months, he became even more distant. He'd snap at my mother over trivial things. He started drinking heavily in the evenings, something he never did. The designer gifts kept coming, but they felt like bribes, not gifts of affection. Mom, meanwhile, became vigilant. She started going through his desk drawers when he was gone, her expression a mixture of fear and growing resentment. She knew something was wrong, but she was so invested in the illusion that she refused to speak the truth aloud, even to him, even to me. We all walked on eggshells, pretending the floor wasn't about to give way. The morning of the arrest, the police had warrants for every electronic device in the house and every bank account. They were meticulous. They spent hours ripping apart my father's study, and as they did, my mother retreated. She didn't call a lawyer immediately. She called her socialite friends, whispering urgently about how this was a terrible misunderstanding, how jealous competitors were targeting him. That was her first priority, damage control for her reputation. My priority was figuring out what was going on. I listened to the news reports, the terrifying details emerging. Millions of dollars siphoned from client accounts, shell corporations, forged signatures. It was worse than anyone could have imagined. When I finally found the courage to confront my mother, asking her, "Did you know any of this, Mom?" her response broke me more than the sight of Dad in cuffs. She looked me dead in the eye, not with sadness, but with pure calculation, and said, "It doesn't matter what I knew, sweetheart. What matters is what we tell people." It was then I realized the true extent of the fraud wasn't just financial, it was moral. They had built their entire lives on lies, and my mother was willing to sacrifice the truth, and even me, to salvage the wreckage of her social standing. The story was all over the news for months. The trial was a media circus. My father pleaded not guilty at first, putting our family through hell, dragging out the agony with months of court dates and legal fees that rapidly depleted whatever legal, traceable assets we had left. The luxury magazine house, gone. My mom had to sell it immediately, and the money barely covered the initial legal retainers. We moved into a tiny, two-bedroom apartment that smelled faintly of mildew. My mom, stripped of her fancy charity work and her social circle, which immediately dropped her like a hot potato, started to unravel. She became spiteful and bitter, blaming everyone but my father. She blamed the police, the justice system, his clients, and even me for not being supportive enough. I was a high school senior at the time, and my college applications, which had been the one thing that was truly mine, suddenly became leverage for her. She threatened to pull my funding, even for the few state schools I'd applied to, demanding I call friends' parents and beg for money or favors. I was terrified. All my life I'd been obedient, quiet, and striving for their approval. Now I was forced into a role I never asked for, the adult. So that's the situation I was in. My father was looking at a decade in federal prison, and my mother, the one I had left, was actively trying to sabotage my future out of pure spite and self-pity. I was trapped in a tiny apartment with a woman who had become a toxic stranger, and my college dream was dangling by a thread. I had nothing left to lose. Before I tell you what happened next, what I eventually found, and the choice I had to make, I want you to pause and comment below what you would have done in my shoes. Would you have prioritized your own escape, your future, or would you have stayed and tried to protect your mother, despite everything? My dad finally took a plea deal about 9 months after the arrest. He got 8 years. The day before his sentencing, he called me from the holding facility. It was a short, stilted conversation, full of apologies that sounded hollow, but then he said something that stopped my breath. He told me he had done everything he could to protect me, and that there was a safe, a small amount of money he'd set aside years ago for my education that was completely untraceable, not linked to the fraud and off the books. He had planned to surprise me with it for graduation, a final gift, but he needed to tell me now. He said to go to his old study, look behind the loose baseboard on the east wall, and there would be a copy of The Great Gatsby, his favorite book, ironically. Inside the book, he said, would be the details for a safety deposit box. He made me promise not to tell my mother. The very next day, the day he was sentenced, while my mother was at court, I went back to the house, which was now empty and scheduled for foreclosure. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the screwdriver. I found the loose baseboard, pulled out the worn copy of The Great Gatsby, and inside, taped to the page where Gatsby looks across the water, was a key and a small slip of paper with a bank name and box number. It was a risk. It felt dirty, like I was complicit in his crime, but it was my only way out. The next day, I took a bus downtown. I opened the box. Inside was a cashier's check made out to me and several $1,000s in cash. It was enough for my tuition, my books, and a small deposit on an apartment near campus. It wasn't life-changing wealth, but it was freedom. It was my future. The cashier's check was for a legitimate scholarship fund Dad had set up for me years ago, before things went south, but the cash was definitely shady. I knew I couldn't tell my mother. If she knew, she would take it, control it, and use it to maintain her own dwindling lifestyle. This was my one chance to break the cycle. I applied to a college on the opposite side of the country, one I had put off applying to because it was too far for my parents. I was accepted 2 weeks later. When I broke the news to my mother, she flew into a rage. She demanded to know where I was getting the money. She accused me of being selfish, ungrateful, and a terrible daughter. She threatened to call the police on me, claiming I must have stolen money from Dad's firm. I just looked at her, standing in the cramped kitchen of our mildew-smelling apartment, and finally, for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid. I simply told her, "I found a way, Mom, a way out." I left a month later. I used the cash for my moving expenses and the check to pay my first semester's tuition. I didn't leave a forwarding address. I cut off contact. It sounds harsh, I know, but I had to choose myself. The consequence of my father's actions was his imprisonment. The consequence of my mother's denial was her isolation. My consequence, my freedom, was the beginning of my true life. When I look back, my family didn't just implode. It exploded, scattering shrapnel that cut deep, but that ultimately allowed me to break free. I finished college, I'm working now, and I'm financially independent. I've sent letters to my dad in prison, but I've kept a careful, necessary distance from my mother. The family I once had is gone, replaced by a life that is honest, quiet, and finally, truly mine. It was a shocking, painful, and traumatic experience, but it forced me to confront the difference between a life of performance and a life of substance. And so, here I am years later, still wrestling with the ghost of that morning. Was it selfish to take that money and run? Was it wrong to abandon my mother in her time of crisis, even though her crisis was entirely of her own making? I've wrestled with the guilt, but the simple fact is, I couldn't save them, but I could save myself. That's the real moral of the story. Sometimes, saving your own life means letting go of the one you were given. You have to be willing to walk away from a blazing house, even if your parents built it. I hope sharing this helps someone out there who feels trapped by the false expectations and toxic patterns of their own family. It is okay to put your own life first. Like this video if you were on my side and think I made the right choice for my own survival. Subscribe for more stories like this where the truth is stranger and much darker than fiction. And please, share your final thoughts on this whole mess in the comments section below. I want to know what you think. I'll see you all in the next story.